Howdy, Ags. This is Kyle McClinigan, the multimedia editor for the Battlaion. Today is Thursday, January 27th, and welcome to this week's episode of the Bat Signal. First in campus news, the interim dean of the College of Liberal Arts announced to faculty via email this week that nearly all departments currently within the academic building will be relocated by summer. Here to provide some more insight on how this might affect both students and faculty is Michaela Rush, the news editor who broke the story. Hey Michaela, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Kyle.
So, what departments are going to be most affected by this?
Yeah, so all the departments that are being affected are all a part of the College of Liberal Arts currently. So that includes the Hispanic Studies Department, International Studies, and then also Sociology. And then additionally, there is some office space in there that does help out our other language departments on campus, so things like German and Chinese.
Okay, great. And in your reporting, what did you find might be the biggest impact of this move?
So these departments, particularly Hispanic Studies and Sociology departments, have been in here, according to one of my sources, since he started working here in 1984.
Oh, wow.
So this is a huge impact, of course, not only for these professors and for these researchers having to move, but it's also resulting in a lot of classroom space. I personally am a Spanish minor. All of my Spanish classes have been in the academic building. So it's going to be a really big shift because not only are they all being asked to vacate, but there's also no information on possible sites where they may move to, how they may replace the spaces, especially for the classrooms. That's a big concern with a lot of students needing to get those kinds of credits.
Okay. And so how have some of the students and faculty you talked to reacted to this news?
Yeah, it's been pretty skeptical is the response. A lot of students have been, outright mad about it, but I think there's just a lot of concern, and a big thing I heard from a lot of professors is that they would have felt a lot less concerned if they had literally any information about what was to come next. I've also gotten quite a few responses on Twitter, some that I thought were interesting. One from Bailey Dobson. She said, "It's honestly disheartening to see the college and department I've been a part of for nearly 4 years now getting booted out with no home in sight. Love the International Studies program, faculty, and classes. The academic building will always have a special place in my heart." And then the other one from Alexia Hernandez said, "Very disheartening to see my major, International Studies, being moved from one of my favorite buildings on campus. I'm honored to be taking INTS classes in the academic building its last semester, but this is really disappointing." So really just a lot of disappointment and confusion coming from students and faculty alike.
Yeah, definitely. So is there any word yet as to where these departments might be relocated to?
There is literally no information, and that is based off of the email sent out by the interim dean, but then also I did reach out to a couple administrative members, specifically Dr. Harris, who heads up the International Studies Department, and she said that she actually did not have any further information either. So hopes are that they're just planning and looking for spaces, but that also does raise the question, where is there space on campus? Because I'm not sure that there is ample space to fit all of these departments.
No, yeah, definitely. It'll be interesting to see where everyone gets moved to. Well, thank you again for joining us. It's been great to have you on.
Thank you so much.
In state and local news, last week the Brazos Valley Republican Party hosted a forum with 4 Republican governor primary candidates who made their case for why they should take Governor Greg Abbott's spot. Joining us today is Battalion columnist Zach Freeman to discuss his opinions on the conference. Welcome to the show, Zach.
Thanks for having me.
So I understand that you actually attended the event and was even able to ask a few candidates questions beforehand.
Yes, sir.
What were, I guess, lack for a better word, the general vibes that each candidate gave off during the almost 2-hour conference?
I would say for as long as it was, the vibes were pretty spicy, and you see this a lot in politics in general. Things are, just starting to heat up, but especially on the conservative side. We've seen a big push in just the diversification of what used to be sort of taboo and extremist positions now sort of seem to be entering the mainstream in a lot of ways. I mean, for example, you've got West, who is, pushing some pretty blatant and just open expansion of our, militarization and expanding, I guess, for lack of a better word, in-group identity and sort of white identitarian dog whistles, little signs like that coming up more often than you would think in just a boring little College Station governor primary event. It was definitely interesting, a very vibeful event, pretty, I think, indicative of just what Texas politics are like right now in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. So did any of the candidates really stand out to you as having a, I guess, at all real chance of challenging Governor Greg Abbott?
I think closest one who does have a chance, I would say, has to be West for sure. He's also polling, second in the polls, I think at about 15%, which still, he's not quite at a level where he'd be competitive with Abbott. But listening to him speak and give his statements, I kind of got the sense that he was the most well-prepared, the most organized, maybe the best coached, and the most serious about what he's doing on that stage and running. And I would be hazard a bet that, even if he doesn't win the governor's primary, we are not going to see the last of him. I think he's going to stick around and try to become a staple in, conservative Texas politics for a long time now.
Okay. And do you think some of that might be that he was the party chairman for Texas, correct? For the Republican
Yes.
Party? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big part of it. He was in Florida for a while. I think he ran for Congress, and he won a spot, then he lost it, I think, his next election. But then he came back here and became Republican Party chair, and now I think he's trying to just sort of build off of that base.
Okay, yeah. So I know Danny Harrison brought up a usually controversial opinion in the GOP when it came to legalizing THC. Could you go into a little bit about how the crowd reacted to his stance on that and kind of what his stance was on legalizing THC?
Yeah, Danny Harrison was definitely the most pro marijuana candidate on stage. It was one of the first things that he brought up when the event started. And that was probably the most applause he got that night, I think. I mean, even here in Texas, conservative stronghold, there's a overwhelming majority support for the legalization of cannabis, even recreationally. Poll after poll after poll shows a majority or even 2/3 are in support of it, even among conservatives. He definitely found I think he struck a soft spot for many in the crowd with those statements, but in general, he's sort of seen as I'd say the vibes that he gave off, he's kind of the smallest candidate there, sort of a weirdo fringe libertarian type guy.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think people reacted to it pretty warmly, though, in general.
Okay, and so do you think that may show a trend as, like, the Republican Party, at least in Texas, opening up to the idea? Do you think, since he brought it up and it got some approval from the crowd, that other candidates may, in the future, want to adopt that as one of their policies for their campaign? Or do you think people like West, who you said may have the best chance, he's polling in second, do you think there's ever a chance he'll want to legalize weed in Texas?
I think there's definitely, for West specifically, it's a little harder to say because his issue with it, because he talked about it, was that it does not comply with federal law on marijuana. And if you join the military or serve in any kind of capacity like that, then, you either have to lie about, if you are smoking weed, which is legal in the States and not legal for the country. You've got to either lie about that or just not serve in the military. And I guess he's not willing to present this kind of contradiction. But for sure, I think, even just what was said on stage would be almost unthinkable 10, 15 years ago for a Republican primary. I would say it was about 50-50 people who were against it were sort of not too, they weren't crazy about not having it. They were just sort of a little cold towards it and talked about maybe looking at different options and seeing what the people of Texas wanted through referendum. I think maybe Huffines or Prather suggested a referendum. And the ones that were for it were, I'd say, pretty passionate, like Harrison, and I believe Prather was kind of more warm on the subject. So yeah, for sure. I think even within conservatives, the legalization of marijuana is becoming much less of a partisan issue, much less of a wedge issue.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Zach.
Yeah, of course. Happy to be here.
For our final story, we turn to the ongoing buildup of forces on the Ukrainian-Russian border as negotiations between Russia and NATO over Ukraine stall, leaving the world to watch and wait for what many have seen as a possible invasion from Russia. This week, I spoke with Russian history professor Stephen Rieg to get some background on the history of the current situation.
My name is Dr. Stephen Rieg. I'm an assistant professor of history at Texas A&M University.
What is some of the history behind the relationship between Ukraine and Russia, and what context does this add to the current situation?
The context is very important. The relationship is really grounded in the fact that Russians and Ukrainians are two of the three members of the Eastern Slavic ethno-national group, ethnic group, alongside the Belarusians. The Russians and the Ukrainians have their own languages, they have their own histories, they have their own national traditions, but at the same time, they share tremendous similarities in all of those aspects of culture and day-to-day life.
I know recently Russia has been asking, kind of demanding, with kind of the threat of soldiers on Ukrainian's border, that Ukraine not be allowed to join NATO if it ever requests to do so. And so, what is some of the history behind the relationship between Russia and NATO, since NATO was originally created during the Cold War?
The history, of course, is started out in a pretty clear-cut manner as a history of antagonism between the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, led by the United States and its Western allies, and the Warsaw Pact states led by the Soviet Union. Now, this relationship got much more interesting, I think, much more polyvalent after the end of the Cold War, with Russia emerging from the ashes of the defunct Soviet Union as the loser of decades-long Cold War conflict. Since 1999, however, NATO has continued to expand eastward. That is a simple fact that anyone looking at a map can see. And they've been expanding closer and closer to Russian borders. In the mid-2000s, they allowed a much more rapid expansion, 7 new countries, including all 3 of the Baltic countries, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia joined. And that has really changed the dynamic in terms of Russian fears of NATO encirclement, at least what they consider, what they view as NATO encirclement.
And my final question, which is also speculation, do you think Russia at this point is actually going to invade Ukraine or set up some kind of fake pretense for invasion? Or do you think it's more just they just want the attention and want their demands at least heard?
Well, not only do I have absolutely no idea, but also not a single person anywhere knows. There are all these cogent op-eds right now that not even Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin knows what he's going to do next, much less his inner circle, much less his generals, much less the Russian commanders in the field, and much, much less any American or Western European politician and strategist. We do not know. What we do know, and what has become pretty clear over the past 3 or 4 days, is that the relentless and ongoing buildup, which is now more than 106,000 troops, some of whom have been relocated from the Far East. The buildup is truly unique. It is truly unprecedented. Russia, as most large countries, very powerful militaries, conducts huge military exercises, but this is unlike anything we have seen since 1991. The point I'm making is that this buildup has gone on for so long, and it's to such an unprecedented degree that anything short of achieving some kind of a publicly conspicuous victory by Russia would be viewed as an embarrassment and unacceptable.
I also spoke with international studies junior Laura Jordan, whose upcoming study abroad trip was canceled due in part to the ongoing situation.
Yeah, and so you said last year it was canceled because of COVID. Was this year, was it also canceled because of COVID and kind of what's happening with Ukraine and Russia right now? Or how much did that actually play into the decision to kind of cancel the trip?
I can't really say with from the other end of things, but from my end, going into this, I knew that there was a possibility of it being canceled again due to COVID, just because of how the situation over there is. And on top of that, the whole situation in Ukraine right now, that's been escalating. So that's, I think, one of the reasons. But then another reason is just there's not that many Russian students going abroad with this program. So that's another reason. It's like 3 things.
Yeah.
But kind of bummed.
Yeah, I bet. Okay, so for my final question, I just want to know, you said you study Russia as one of your minors, right? So what are your thoughts on the current situation between Russia and Ukraine, like as a student and as someone who studies the culture and history? I know that's a big question, so.
We haven't touched much on this in my classes, but keeping up with everything that I see in the news, it's concerning that it could grow into something larger and more serious than just a conflict between neighboring countries that used to be the Soviet Union. But for the most part, it just, from my perspective as a student, it's really unfortunate. It's unfortunate for the people that are going to have to go through that if the violence commences. And it's just unfortunate for everything that's coming to a halt based off of what might ensue. So it's also kind of, if I do want like to pursue a career in diplomacy, it's giving me like upfront, like this is what would happen. And if conflict happens, all the diplomats in Ukraine were ordered to evacuate and their families, if all non-essential personnel. So it's also a look into what happens when conflict happens from a diplomacy end. So it's an unfortunate situation, but not much I can do on my end.
That's all for this week. For today's full stories and more, please visit our website, thebat.com, and be sure to pick up a copy of our print edition on campus. This week's contributors were Michaela Rush and Zach Freeman. This episode was produced and edited by Kyle McClinigan.